We begin today's shiur 15 lines from the top of Daf Nun Gimel. The Gemara quotes a line from the Mishnah on Daf Nun Amud Aleph, Cholatz ve'osa maimer ve'nosan get u'boal. The Mishnah goes on to say, Ein achar chalitza klum, that once chalitza is done, so then nothing else takes hold. In other words, if after chalitza is done, there is an attempt to give the chalutza money, maimer, kiddushay maimer, it does not have to be dealt with. Or if after chalitza is done, a get is given to the chalutza, that get has no halachic effect. The Gemara asks, V'nisni nami ein achar bi'a klum. Why doesn't the Mishnah also state that after the act of intimacy is done, let us say, just for an example, there are two Yivmin, and there is one Yevama, that is, Ruvain died, leaving Shimon and Levi, and Shimon does Yibum, is bi'ah, with the widow of Ruvain. She becomes his wife. So then if Shimon offers her money, let us say, maimer, that has no effect. It's like giving money to a strange person as a gift. It doesn't have any halachic effect. So why doesn't the Mishnah teach that as well? Abaye v'Rava tanu. In fact, Abaye and Rava teach in their version of the Mishnayos, Ein achar bi'a klum. Now, there's a note in Rashi, a few lines down from here, Toni ein la'achar bi'a klum, v'lo tzorach lemisni nami ein la'achar chalitza klum. In their version, they have, in fact, there is nothing that follows bi'a. They don't teach in their version of the Mishnah ein la'achar chalitza klum. They came with the Tana ein la'achar bi'a klum. Once you teach that after bi'a there is nothing else that takes effect, hu hadinami di ein achar chalitza klum. It is true as well for there is nothing after chalitza. V'lishna klilahu lemisni chada o bi'a o chalitza, and it's simply a form of, let's say, klila is literally light speech or short version of teaching both points. All you need to do is teach one and I figure out the other. Now our Tana didn't do that though. Our Tana didn't teach Ein Achar Bi'a Klum. So the Gemara goes on, V'Tana Didan, our Tana who said Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, even though Bi'a was featured in the Seifa of the Mishnah, as Rashi says, nevertheless our Mishnah felt it important to teach that once chalitza is done, nothing takes hold, because hatoras Yevama l'shuk adifa leig. Adifa means it was more important for him or better for him to emphasize that element or that instrument that frees the Yevama to marry anyone she wants, as the word lashuk indicates. Lashuk literally is the marketplace. We continue now with a quote from the Mishnah that continues on to Daf Nun Amud Beis. In other words, the Mishnah started the beginning of the parak at Nun Amud Aleph, and this is now a quote from Nun Amud Beis. Echod Yevama Achas, Echod Shtei Yevamos. Whether it be one Yevama to one Yavam, or two Yevamas, where Reuven died leaving two widows and one brother, Yavam Echad. Namely, the rules of the Mishnah apply in all cases equally. Before we go further in the Gemara, there's a marking scheme that continues till Amud Beis, and you'll note on the side under the Mivneh, the trapezoid, when it appears, it highlights the expression or the idea that masnisin delo, that our Mishnah is not like so and so. So here, the Gemara says the Mishnah is not like Ben Azai. On Amud Beis, you'll see at another point after the Gemara quotes the Mishnah that our Mishnah is not like delo ki haitana, and it goes on to say which Tana that is. So here we have Masnisin Delo Kiben Azai. According to the Chachomim in our Mishnah, there is a possibility of Maimer Achar Maimer when you have two women and one Yavam, two widows and one Yavam, which means that if Reuven dies leaving two widows, widow 1 and widow 2, and he also is survived by his brother Shimon, Shimon gives money to widow number 1. According to the Chachamim in the Mishnah, if Shimon were to give money to widow number 2, that would take effect, and he would have to give a divorce document to widow number 2 as well to undo the money bond that he had presented to her. Now, these are, if you're a first-time listener, we should tell you that these are concepts that we've been dealing with at length since the beginning of this parak. So we're not going to be re-explaining all of these ideas in detail so as not to bore those that are already familiar. But we continue in the Gemara. Our Gemara says that Masisin Delo Ben Azai. Our Mishnah is not in accordance with Ben Azai. Desanya Ben Azai Omer Yesh Maimer Achamayamur B'Shnei Yivmin V'Yevama Achas. There is a possibility of a second Maimer taking hold when, upon Reuven's death, he left two brothers, Shimon and Levi, and one widow. However, v'ein maimer acha maimer b'shtei Yevamos v'yavam echad. Now here you see we underlined this because this is the case that needs to be emphasized, that according to Ben Azai, if Reuven died leaving two widows and is survived by only one brother, once again according to Ben Azai, Shimon used up all his maimer power with the first widow. Nothing would take hold if he gives money to the second widow. Our Mishnah disagrees. We continue again with another quote from the Mishnah. Ketzad Maimer Lezu v'chulei, and the v'chulei means etc. What we want to focus on is what is that etc. that's being quoted here, and it's a case of there was Maimer Bezu v'cholatz Lezu. He gave money to one widow and did chalitza with the second widow. Harishonot tzricha get. This is found, by the way, in our Mishnah, 5 lines from the top of Daf Nun Omid Beis. You'll notice a new marking, and we feature this on the side under the Mivneh, the Lemo Misayea expression. Let us say that our Mishnah supports, and you'll see in the course of the Gemara how there are attempts made to support different Amoraic opinions based on information in the Mishnah. So according to our Mishnah, if Maimer was done with one of the widows, Chalitza done with the second widow, so the first widow will need a get to undo the effects of the money that was given to her. Lema Messiah le Lishmuel, skip the brackets for a moment. Utyufta de Rav Yosef. Can we say that our Mishnah supports Shmuel and refutes Rav Yosef? Now we have to know what each one said in order to make sense of this. So in the brackets, the Gemara quotes Shmuel's opinion, and then we'll try to see how our Mishnah would support his point of view. As far as what Rav Yosef holds, we will resort to Rashi for elucidation on what Rav Yosef's position was, that our Mishnah would seemingly present a problem. So what did Shmuel say? So we read in the brackets, the Omar Shmuel cholatz lebalas maimer lo niftara sarasa, that if a man, Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Reuven died, leaving two widows, if money were given to one of the widows, and then chalitza was done with her, with the one that received the money, that's a chalitza psula, it's a weakened chalitza, because the chalitza doesn't sever all bonds that had been formed, because money had been given to her. Therefore, the chalitza done with the balas hamaimer doesn't release the tzora, the co-wife, the second widow. Well, in our Mishnah, we see that point, that even though chalitza was done with the second widow, a get still was necessary to undo the maimer of the first. So our Mishnahs would seem to support Shmuel. Let's take a look at this point in Rashi as well, toward the end of the narrow lines. Leimo Mesele Lishmuel, Amaimer Lezu, V'cholatz Lezu Koi. Our Mishnah is referring to that point, where Maimer was done with one widow, and the chalitza, the shoe removal ceremony, was done with the other. Midolo Noka Chalitza Balas Maimer, from the fact that the Mishnah seemed to have deliberately not given as an example chalitza done with the Balas Maimer, Messiah Shmuel, this would seem to support Shmuel. The Omar, Shmuel, who says Cholatz L'Balas Maimer Loi Niftarot Sarasib. Chalitza was done with the Balas Maimer, it wouldn't have released the second widow. The cave and the boy get L'Mamoro. Since a get is needed to undo the Maimer, Lo Havyo Chalitza Ma'al Yisa Lafuke Zika de Chaberta. Since a get is still required to undo the Maimer, Chalitza done with her wouldn't have been a high quality Chalitza Ma'al Yisa, enough to have broken the Yibum connection, the Zika, with the second widow. So as we said, Shmuel's point would seem to derive support from our Mishnah. What did Rav Yosef say? Well, Rashi quotes it. It's a Gemara that we've seen earlier in the Masechta. The Utiyufta de Rav Yosef, Rashi says, the Amar B'Hachoylet, that's the name of the parak, Lo Yishpoich Odom Mei Boyroi V'Achirim Tzrichim Lohem. This is a phrase. Person shouldn't spill out good fresh water from his well when others need that very water. The ha the cholatz l'chaverta, the komaisa bayaget. In this case, he did chalitza with the other woman, with the non-balas hamaymer, while the balas hamaymer needs a get. Now, that balas hamaymer is going to be rendered unfit to the kahuna anyway, because a get is going to have to be given to her. Once a woman receives a get, that makes her unfit to the kahuna. The second widow, according to Rav Yosef, should not be the one dealt with. By doing chalitza with the second widow, you're making her unfit, prohibited to the kahuna as well. So that woman, until you do chalitza with her, that second widow, was fit for the kahuna. Now you're taking a woman that could have been married by a kohen and you're ruining her. That's the analogy that was referred to earlier of don't spill out water when others can benefit from it. V'nimtza, Rashi goes on, v'nimtza poisel shtein min kahuna. And you end up ruining both women from the kahuna by following the pattern or the model of the Mishnah. And Rav Yosef would seem to hold otherwise. V'lo amrinon, and the Mishnah doesn't allow us to say lichloitz lukamaisu techaverta kshera. Do chalitza with the first one, the woman that received the maimer, the woman that's going to be puzzled to the kuna anyway, because you're going to have to give her a get, and let the second woman remain kosher to the kuna. Our Mishnah, once again, doesn't seem to confirm that. The Gemara responds and says that our Mishnah is not a refutation of Rav Yosef. Mi katani cholates. Does the Mishnah say that you are, as a first choice, supposed to do chalitza with the second widow? Cholatz katani. He happened to do chalitza with the second widow. Di avad, that's post facto. But as a first choice, in fact, you should follow Rav Yosef. That's what he would say. Namely, don't do chalitza with the second widow. You should choose as your first choice to do chalitza with the widow that had received maimer, that's going to need a get anyway. We continue. Get lizu, the get lizu. Tzrichos heimenu chalitza. You'll notice that we, in addition to writing that into the Gemara between the lines of tzrichos heimenu chalitza, we've also underlined tzrichos. Tzrichos is a plural word. Both need chalitza then. So, if there were two widows that Ruvain left upon his demise, and Shimon gave a get to widow 1 and widow number 2, according to the Mishnah, both women will need a chalitza. Leimo Misayale LaRabba Bar Rav Huna. Let us say that this supports Rabba's teaching. The Yoma Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Chalitza psula tzricha lechazer al kol ha'achin. A weakened chalitza. Again, I know that we've said this many times, but a chalitza psula is a weakened chalitza. That's a situation where chalitza is done with a Yevama, one whom you could not have married. And once a get is given to a Yevama, you can't marry her anymore. In our case, a get was given to each one of the Yevamas. So each one needs a separate chalitza, and that would seem to confirm Rabba's teaching, where if a widow had been given a get, a woman who was, of course, was a Yevama, received a get, in order for her to get released and allowed to marry anyone she wants, she would have to go to all of the surviving brothers in order to receive a heter lashuk. Let us take a look at the Rashi on the 4th line under the Gemara text. Srichois mashma chalitza l'chol achas. The kevan de chalitzas shtehen ruah. As we explained before, if there were 2 widows that were left and each one received a get, so each widow is going to need her own chalitza. Since any one chalitza is weakened, ein achas mehen poteres chaverta. No one will release her friend, her co-widow. The Kotoni Seifa and the Mishnah goes on to say, V'chein shnei yivmin liyavama achas, Yehonasan get. If Reuven was survived by Shimon and Levi, and Reuven left one widow, and Shimon gave that widow a get, and Levi gave her a get, Sricho chalitza mishtem, she would need a chalitza from each one of them, from Shimon and Levi. Because any one chalitza is a chalitza psula, it's a weakened chalitza. So our Mishnah, by acknowledging that when confronted by a situation of a weakened chalitza, that subsequent chalitza that's done is not sufficient to release all of the widows, nor is it sufficient to have received chalitza from any one of the surviving brothers if it was a chalitza psula. So is it not so then that our Mishnah supports Rabba's approach? The Gemara says no. My tzrichos, when the Mishnah uses the plural expression tzrichos, it's a generic type of tzrichos, tzrichos te'alma. In other words, it's needed in general by the realm of Yevamos, namely that a get that is given to a chalitza, so that the world of women that received chalitzas, the world of Yevamos that received gittin, need to, in addition, receive chalitza. But it's a reference to the world of Yevamos, not necessarily a reflection on a case of a, say, multiple yavam situation. We continue in the Gemara. Get lezu, v'cholatz lezu. A get was given to one Yevama, and chalitza done with a second Yevama. Leimo Messiah Shmuel v'tevi tufta the Rav Yosef. Once again, the Gemara is quite terse. In order to appreciate this, we look at the Rashi. We have a double star to help you find it. Hachi garsinon get lezu v'cholatz lezu leimo Messiah Shmuel. Midolo nokat chalitza lebalas get, from the fact that the Mishnah does not feature chalitza done with the woman that received the get. Elo lechaverta. The Mishnah speaks about chalitza done with the co-widow. Messiah Shmuel. This would support Shmuel. The Amar Perik Daled Achin. Cholatz lebalas get lo nifterat tzara. That if you choose to do chalitza with the widow that received the get, that wouldn't release a co-wife when a co-widow is on the scene. So our Mishnah, by saying the get was given to one and chalitza was done with the other widow, the one that did not receive the get, this would seem to support Shmuel, because if the chalitza was done with the Baal Saget, it wouldn't release the other one. So here you have a case or a chance to do one chalitza to release both of them through the chalitza. So our Mishnah seems to support Shmuel on the one hand, and it seems to be against Rav Yosef because of what we said earlier. In this case, you had given a get to one woman, according to Rav Yosef, who doesn't want you to ruin something that doesn't need to be ruined. In this case, we would not want to have the other woman pasuled from the kuna, and therefore chalitza would be done with the balas haget. And yet our Mishnah doesn't say that. The Gemara responds, similar to the way we answered earlier, mi kotani chaylates. Does the Mishnah say that that's what you should do as a first choice, to do chalitza with the other widow, the non-balas haget, the widow that was kosher to the kahuna? Cholatz kotani. A cholatz is in the past tense, a post facto, which means di avad. If it was done, so it's effective, but not as a first choice. And the reason for saying that would be because out of sensitivity to Rav Yosef's concern. Cholatz v'chulei. This is from Nun Omid Beis, 10 rows from the top of the Omid. The Mishnah went on to say, Ein achar chalitza klum. But before it got to that phrase, the Mishnah gave a series of examples, which you can find if you look back at Nun Amid Beis, the diamond number 4. And the Mishnah, as we saw earlier, the Mishnah here too says Ein achar chalitza klum. It doesn't say Ein achar bi'o klum. So the Gemara asks, V'lisni nami ein achar bi'o klum. Why not teach at this point that once bi'ah is done, so nothing takes hold? Abaya v'Rava tanu ein achar bi'ah klum. Abaya and Rava have as their version of the Mishnah, in fact, ein achar bi'ah klum. And as we saw before in the Rashi, that would include ein achar chalitza klum as well. It would appear to me that saying ein achar bi'ah klum would make for a smoother reading of the Mishnah, because that's the example that was given just before the rule of Ein Achar Bi'al Klum. Namely, the final example was Boal, etc. V'tana Didan, our Mishnah that chooses the expression of Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, HaToras Yevama L'Shulk Adifa Lei. It is of more importance to emphasize that instrument, namely the chalitza, which releases the Yevama and enables her to marry whomever she wants. Bein Yavam Echad L'Shtei Yevamos, whether you're talking about a case of one surviving brother and 2 widows, and Mishnah went on to say Bein Shnei Yivmin L'Yevama Achas, or a case of 2 men that survive, 2 brothers that survive, and 1 widow. Notice the new marking, the crown marking, with the tip, with the points facing upwards. They represent she'elos, beginning with the word bishlama, that things work out according to one opinion, but according to the second opinion, something needs to be clarified. And the inverted crown represents chuvos, responses. This structure will continue on the top of Amid Beis as well. Bishlama the Rabbi Yochanan, the Omar Kula Beisa Belav Koi. Our Mishnah, in its terse fashion, covers quite a few different cases, different possibilities. Rabbi Yochanan had taught his principle quite a bit earlier in this Masechta, Namely, that if you have, let us say, multiple widows and multiple surviving brothers, multiple widows from the one deceased brother. Reuven died leaving a few widows, and there are several brothers that survive. As far as the halacha is concerned, all that's necessary is chalitza to be done between one of the brothers and one of the widows, and that frees all the widows to marry l'shuk, and the other brothers don't have to do anything. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the man and woman that participate in the chalitza actually serve as agents of all the rest. And just like the chalutz and the chalutza, the cholates and the chalutza, or the chalutz, the one from whom the shoe was removed, and the chalutza, the woman who was released, just like if they were, let us say, to cohabit with one another after they did chalitza with one another, they would be guilty of a lav, a negative command. Just like that is true with regard to them specifically, it is true with regard to all the other brothers and all the other widows. As we said before, that's a function of agency. And we say, shluchos shel adam kamoso, when I send you to do something on my behalf, it's as if I did it. So, Rabbi Yochanan says we'll call it the whole household, as the Gemara says at the Kula Besa, all of them are now forbidden to the tune of a negative command. Negative command, as we've said many times in the past, is a lower level offense than other types of forbidden relations that are prohibited with a kores punishment or a court execution, misas beis din. Well, our Mishnah teaches that the laws apply. For example, ein achar chalitza klum, even when you're dealing with multiple widows and multiple brothers. That means, in effect, that if, let us say, Shimon had done chalitza with widow number 1, Levi, another of the surviving brothers, is usher to widow number 2, belav. And what does our Mishnah say? Ein achar chalitza klum? That if that Levi would give money to widow number 2 after Shimon had done chalitza with widow number 1, nothing takes effect. Which in halachic terms is we're saying ein kiddushin toifsin b'chai ve'lavin. The Gemara will spell that out. So that information is important. That's something that we happen to know is a machlokes tanoim, and it happens to be according to Rebbe Akiva, who's we'll call it a minority opinion. But we have a stam Mishnah, unnamed, naming no authority in the Mishnah, unnamed Mishnah, coming out like Rebbe Akiva. That all of that is information, is novel information. It's something I wouldn't have known had it not been stated. In contrast to Rabbi Yochanan, there is Reish Lakish, who holds that as far as a lav prohibition, negative command, between man and woman in this scenario, that is true only with regard to the cholates and the chalutza. In our example, Shimon and widow number 1. However, Levi and widow number 2 are an isur kores. Why? Basically, it's an isur eshes ach. The widow number 2 was the wife of Levi's brother, namely Reuven, the deceased. And for Levi to engage in intimacy with her, with widow number 2, that would be a violation of kores. And kores is like a brother and sister. Imagine a brother trying to give money in marriage of a sister. Nothing takes hold. So to here, nothing takes. Our Mishnah is telling us nothing takes hold between the other Yivmin and the other widows. That's obvious. In fact, the only case of lav, as far as Reish Lakish is concerned, is between the cholates and the chalutza themselves. But the cholates and one of the co-widows, or one of the other brothers and the chalutza, those are the kores. Why does the Mishnah, according to Reish Lakish, have to tell me that if there are 2 widows and 1 yavam, or 2 surviving brothers and 1 yavama, that there is the maimer done after the chalitza doesn't take effect? That's poshit. So now what we just did is we spelled out all of the information in the Gemara. Let's read it in the text. I understand, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says the whole household, all the widows and all the surviving brothers, with one another would be be'isur lav. Once chalitza was done with one of the brothers and one of the widows, all the rest follow suit, in the sense that they all become the same level prohibition. So it's derech lashminen, therefore the Mishnah has to teach me this scenario of one of the other brothers, let us say, giving maimer to her, to the chalutza, and saying, Ein achar chalitza klum, the maimer is not tofes, the maimer doesn't take effect, and the chiddush is the ein kiddushin toifsin b'chayvei lavin, that kiddushin, the marital bond, does not take effect when you're dealing with even a low-level prohibition like an isur lav, and you have a stam mishnah coming out like Rabbi Akiva. All of that is information that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. But according to Reish Lakish, that says that outside of the very couple, in our case, Shimon that did chalitza with widow number one, all the rest of the combinations are bekores. It's derech lashmein and the ein kiddushin toifsin b'chayvei krisus. Do I need the Mishnah to spell out with its examples that by saying ein achar chalitza klum, you're saying that maimer done by one of the other brothers with that widow, or that cholate's doing maimer with one of the other widows, that nothing takes effect. That's poshut according to everybody. So do you have to tell me that the Kiddushin is not Teifes B'chayvei Krisus? That's a question on Reish Lakish. By Reish Lakish having ruled that only the Cholates and Chalutza are Be'isur Lav and all the rest are Korei, so he runs into this problem that our Mishnah seems to be telling me something that's too obvious. Omar Loch Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish says, if you're asking on me from that particular point of Ein Achar Chalitza Klum, that Maimer done after Chalitza doesn't take effect, is it not so that the Mishnah also says the following? And by the way, note that we have a long answer marking here. So Reish Lakish says, according to you, that the Mishnah is supposedly not to teach us obvious points. Seifa de Katani. The Seifa teaches if, let us say, you had Ruvain and Shimon, and Levi. Ruvain died, leaving a widow, survived by two brothers. Shimon does Bia. Bia is actual Yibum with the widow, and then Levi comes and gives her Kesef Kedoshin. Is Levi's money given to her in marriage going to have any effect? Absolutely not. Shimon did Bia. It says in the words of the Mishnah, quoted right here, Boal, that Shimon did Bia with the widow, and then the second one comes and does Maimer. It's derech lashmina dein kiddushin taipsin b'yeshes ish. Do I need a Mishnah to tell me that there's no tfisas kiddushin, that marriage does not take hold with a married woman? Of course that's superfluous. Why then does the Mishnah teach that? Once the Mishnah teaches us the rules of one Yavam, Shimon, who survives his deceased brother Reuven, and Reuven leaving Yevamos, one widow, the Mishnah taught us all the laws that apply to that case. Tananami, it feels important to teach us also Shtei Yevamos v'Yavam Echad, the case of one surviving brother and two widows. The Aidi Ditona Shtei Yevamos v'Yavam Echad, and since it teaches that case, Tonanami Shtei Yivmin v'Yavam Achas, it teaches me also the case of two surviving brothers and one widow, when in fact there isn't necessarily any chidush in all of that additional information, but rather the Mishnah spells out all the different possibilities. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. This too is a quote from the Mishnah Daf Nun Omid Beis, involving one Yavam and one Yevama. Cholatz v'asa maimer v'nosan v'chulei bishlama cholatz v'asa maimer. It's important, it's necessary to teach a case where chalitza was done, and then after chalitza, the singular yavam, the sole surviving brother, that is Shimon, then gives her money. Our Mishnah goes on to tell us that ein achar chalitza klum, that after the chalitza was done, the money that he gives her doesn't take any effect. Itzrich, that needs to be taught, namely that it's not of any halachic consequence, it's nothing. Salkadaita chamina, on my own, I would have thought, nixar maimer de basar chalitza, let us impose rabbinically the need for a get to undo the maimer that was done after the chalitza, otu maimer de kami chalitza, in anticipation of a case where maimer was done before the chalitza. Now, in a case where maimer is done before the chalitza, that maimer, me'ikir hadin, on principle, requires a get. Now, these two cases have the same words, it's just the order is reversed. In other words, the same events take place, but in reverse order. So, in one case, we tell you that if you do chalitza first and then maimer, you don't have to do anything. It's important for the Mishnah to tell me you don't have to do anything about that maimer, because I might have thought that I should require a get there in anticipation of a case where you really do need a get, where the maimer was done before the chalitza. So let's read that in the words again. Nigzar maimer de basar chalitza atu maimer de kami chalitza. Require a get in a case of maimer after the chalitza in anticipation of the case of maimer before chalitza, which needs a get. Komash malon de lo gazrin, on our Mishnah, by saying after chalitza whatever is done, nothing takes hold. I'm telling you that we don't make that gezerah. We don't impose that additional requirement. Ella, cholatz v'nosan get, but the example of the Mishnah, where it said he did chalitza, the yavam did chalitza with the yevama, and then he gives her a divorce document. Normally, what do I have to teach me regarding that ein achar chalitza klum? It's obvious. Once you release the yevama, giving her a get doesn't have any meaning, doesn't do anything, it doesn't change any status. The Gemara responses, uletamech, according to you that are asking a question based on something that's seemingly obvious or superfluous, emos seifa, state the case in the seifa. Boal also maimer, one yavam and one yavama. Shimon does bia with her. In other words, he does yibum with the widow, and then he gives her money. Boal v'nosan get, or he did bia and then gave her a divorce document. Bishlama boal v'nosan get itzrich. I understand the case or the necessity of teaching where bia was done and then he gave her a get, that we say einachar bia klum, meaning that after he marries her and then he gives her a get, which in effect would be divorcing his wife, he doesn't need to do anything else. All that's needed to sever that relationship is a divorce document, and you don't need to have chalitza. In other words, once a yavam marries the yavama, it becomes his full-fledged wife, and any zika connection, any zikas yivmin was erased, turning into a husband-wife bond and relationship. So all that's necessary is the giving of the get and nothing else. No chalitza is necessary. Salka daita chamina, without that being taught, I would have thought, nigzar, let us impose a ruling that the get should not be enough. You should need chalitza as well, and make it zero of get the basar bila or to get the kami bila, in anticipation of a case where a get were given before the bia, so that if Shimon gave the widow a get and then he did bia with her, that bia would not create a full-fledged husband-wife relationship, and as a result of that, the yibum identity remains, and in order to undo that, you do need to have chalitza. So that once again, where you see order of things being reversed, in the case of Bo'av and Nosan Get, we say you don't need to have chalitza, though there was room to think that you should say, yeah, let's require chalitza there, in anticipation of them reversing the order of first doing giving a get and then doing biyah. Let's read that in the words. Sakadai tachamina nigzor get the bosar ba'ilah. Ought to get the kami ba'ilah. Let's impose the need for chalitza in the case of a get that followed ba'ilah, in anticipation of the case where you really do need chalitza, where get was given first and then biyah was done. Komash mulam delo gazrina. So we're telling you by saying ein achar chalitza klum that we don't impose that gezerah. Avol bo'al v'asa maimer lomali. Why does the Mishnah bother teaching me a case where the Yavam did biyah and then he gave her money? That's his wife. He's giving his wife money. What is the point of teaching me that maimer has no halachic significance? Elo aidi detona cholatz v'asa maimer. Since the Mishnah taught the case of first he did chalitza and then he gave her money, and that was of value. We taught that in order to convey the point that we say ein achar chalitza klum, that there's no kedushin toifsim b'chayvei lavin. So therefore tona nami bo'al v'asa maimer. It also gave a case where, just like we had maimer following chalitza, we give you an example of maimer following biyah, which in fact has no chidush value to it, as we said. The ID the boy the Mishnah bo'av and nosan get, and since the Mishnah had to teach the case of biyah and then giving a get, where we said you don't need to have chalitza after that, and that, in other words, bo'av and nosan get was important. It taught me also something that was superfluous. Tonanami cholatz v'nosan get, where he released her and then gave her a get, which was meaningless. So that if you were asking on me originally, or asking the question of why did the Mishnah teach cholatz v'nosan get, the answer is for the sake of balance of language, just like we proved from the case of bo'av also maimer. The Gemara continues with a reference to the Mishnah on Daf Nun Amud Beis, 4 lines from the end of the Mishnah. Bisman shehi, and if we go back to see what it said there, the Mishnah had said that there's a distinction between chalitza versus biyah. That after chalitza, nothing takes hold wherever the chalitza appears in the order of different actions. Biyah, on the other hand, we will tell you ein achar biyah klum if biyah is in the first position. But if biyah is, let's say, biyah follows a get, or it follows chalitza, so then we say yesh achar biyah klum. Masnisen delo ki haitana. Our Mishnah is not in accordance with the following Tana. So let's continue reading what the following Tana says and then see how our Mishnah is not like that. But actually, before we read the text, we should glance at the side where we have a nosei mivneh heading. The mivneh introduces a double underline that will appear shortly. They highlight Shitois Tanoim im yesh ligzor b'biyah psula b'chalitza psula lomar sheyesh acharei klum. The different Tanoim that look into the matter of biyah psula and chalitza psula. Biyah psula is a case where the biyah that's done is not effective in creating a yibum marriage. Chalitza psula is a situation where the chalitza was done with a woman that at that point you couldn't have actually married her. Does that leave room for other things to take effect after them? Our Mishnah said that there's a difference between chalitza and biyah. That in the case of a chalitza psula, in fact, nothing takes hold. When in the case of a biyah psula, things will take hold afterwards. So our Mishnah, and by the way, take note of the fact that this is one long point. Masnisen delo ki hai tana. Our Mishnah is not like the following Tana. Desanya. Abu Yosi ben Yochanan Yishur Shalayim Oimer Mishum Rabbi Meir. So Abu Yossi quoting Rabbi Meir says, Achas bi'ilah, the achas chalitza, and we dashed underline chalitza, B'tchila ein achra klum. When they are in the first position, so then any subsequent action done will not have any effect. Be'emso b'sof yesh achra klum. In the middle, in other words, if something preceded not only bia but chalitza as well, or if they came at the end, there is room for other actions to take hold. This is in stark contrast to our Mishnah that said that ein achar chalitza klum, even if it's not in the first position. V'shalosh machloikis badover. There are three different Tanaic opinions regarding this matter. There's a Rashi across from here, a little bit up. It says v'shalosh machloikis badover. Tanakama demasnisin domar chalitza psula ein achra klum avobia psula yesh achra klum. That's one opinion. And then we'll see Rabbi Nechemia is another opinion. Domar achazu v'achazu ein achra klum. Rabbi Nechemia says that even a bia psula ein achra klum, nothing will take effect after it. And Rabbi Yosi ben Chonan domar achazu v'achazu yesh achra klum behemsa b'sof. So now we continue in the Gemara. Sholosh machloikis bedover. Tanakama sovar. The Tanakama means the Tanakama of our Mishnah that said bia psula yesh acharel klum bia deika lemigzar gazrinan. In the case of bia, where there is room for imposing gzeros, as was featured on Daf Nun Amud Beis, 7 lines from the end of the Gemara. The Gemara spelled that out. We're not going to redo all of the Gemara regarding this matter, but suffice it to say that with regard to Be'ilah, there is room for imposing a gzera, restrictions, or additional limitations. And hence, if Bia comes out in the middle, then an action can take hold after that. And that's a function of there's room for making a gzera. Chalitza, on the other hand, the lekot lemigzar. With regard to chalitza psula, we can say with confidence, ein achra klum, because there's no other case that we have to, in anticipation of whom we have to worry. This was explained on Daf Nun Amud Beis, 5 lines from the end of the Gemara. And therefore, lo gazrina. And therefore, the Tanakam of our Mishnah says, namely the Tana of our Mishnah holds, ein achar chalitza klum bein be'emsa bein bechila bein be'emsa bein basof. Rabbi Nechemia sovar. Rabbi Nechemia is of the opinion that both bia and chalitza ein achreim klum, bia nami leka lemigzar. As far as bia, there isn't something to worry about. With the kol amris, you raised as a possibility ligzor bia achar haget mishum bia achar chalitza, that we should say that bia done after the get is viewed as weak. So, and creating the impression in the minds of the public that it's not really it's not a real bia, in anticipation of someone who would dare to do bia after chalitza. Bia after chalitza is something that's absolutely forbidden. It's strictly forbidden. Midoraisa it's forbidden. So that maybe in order to show the meaninglessness and hence the prohibition of it, if it were to follow chalitza, let us say that bia achar get, we should say that something could still take effect, which would show how insignificant that bia is. So Rabbi Nechemi will tell you there's no need to impose such a gzera. Kevan de chalitza doraisa, since it's known that chalitza not only releases the woman, but it's something that releases her on a Torah level and creates an isur with the surviving brothers. Meida yadi, people know that, and they won't. If once chalitza is done, people aren't going to come to do bia after that. So therefore, since that doesn't need to be, that's not a law that needs to be protected. Therefore, we don't have to tell you that bia that follows a get that something else could take hold simply because of our concern of bio achar chalitza. Bio achar chalitza isn't going to really come to be. Udeko amris ligzor bio achar maimer, and you might say that let's make a gzera concerning bio achar maimer mishum bio achar bio. That's not something to make a gzera about. Kevon de bio doraisa, since bio takes effect midoraisa. And by the way, the case of bio achar maimer, that would be a case where first money was given and bio was done. To say that bio is weak in anticipation of a case of bio achar bio, since bio is doraisa, that means it creates a bond on a torah level. The widow becomes fully married to the yavam that did bio with her. Any subsequent bio isn't going to take place. It's an isur doraisa. It would be intimacy with a married woman. So ha made the yadi, it's something that's well known, and therefore to suggest that bio achar maimer, when maimer is done first and then it's followed by bio, that we have to tell you that something could take effect in anticipation of this case of bio achar bio, that's unnecessary. Just to clarify this last example of bio achar maimer, let us go back. I hope you have the ability to either turn back or click on Daf Nun Amid Beis, where Rashi explains this very clearly. Rashi that we'd like to learn together, 6 lines from the end of Nun Amid Beis. Bio achar maimer he kagon maimer lazu ba lazu. If Shimon gave money to widow number 1, and then he had intimacy with widow number 2, Lochi Tnan Srichos Shnei Gitin V'Chalitza. The Mishnah taught, that's our Mishnah, it's not Rabbi Nechemia, but our Mishnah says you need to have 2 Gitin plus Chalitza. The Amris beget Sagi law, if you were to say that get would be enough, Amri, people will come to say, once again, that if you say that a get would be enough, and that you don't need chalitza, people will think Amri bio shelzu achar kinyan shelzu mal yusahi. They'll think that the bio done with the second woman after a kinyan done with the first woman is effective. People will then come to think that you could do bio achar bio, that if Shimon, after having done bio with the first widow, could do bio with the second widow. The kopaga be'isur eishes ach, and that would be a severe violation of eishes ach, of cohabiting with one's brother's wife. Rabbi Nechemia is not worried about that. And the third, final opinion, the Abu Yosi ben Chonon Sovar law, Kirabonon de Gazri Babio. Abu Yosi holds like the Rabbanon of our Mishnah that do impose a gzera concerning Bio Psula, saying Yesh Acharei Klum, V'gazar Chalitza Mishum Bio, and he then says that we're going to make a gzera regarding Chalitza Psula as well, in anticipation of the case of Bio Psula. As you can see, with that we come to the conclusion of the 5th parak of Yevamos, and now begin the Mishnah of the 6th parak. Before we begin, let us read the topic heading, Bias Yibum Lo Sorech Kavona Kedei Liknos. The intimacy done between the surviving brother and the deceased's widow doesn't need to have specific intent in order for it to take hold. Now let us read the Mishnah. Habo al Yevimto. A surviving brother has intimacy with the widow of his deceased brother who left no children. Bein b'shoigeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'oinis, bein b'rotzain. Whether it be through any of these different mindsets. B'shogeg is something that's unintentional. Namely, he thought that the woman was his wife. In other words, Shimon survived his deceased brother Reuven, Shimon had his own wife. He thought that he was cohabiting with her, and it turned out to be the widow of Reuven. B'mezid, Rashi says l'shem znus. A znus is harlotry. We'll refer to it maybe by the term immorality. So that he had no mitzvah intention. He knew who she was, but he intended to cohabit with her just for the fun of it, for the sake of having a fling. The case of oinus, that will be discussed in the Gemara, and beratzon is he knows what he's doing. All of those cases, afilu hu shogeg v'hi mezida, even a case where he is shogeg, so he doesn't have yibum intention, he thinks it's his wife. She has immoral thoughts on mind. Hu mezid v'hi shogegas, or the other way around. He is doing it l'shem znus, and she thinks that it's someone that's mutter for her to be with. Hu onus v'hi lo anusa. He is onus, which we haven't explained yet, and she is not. Or the other way around. He anusa v'hu lo onus. All of these cases, we say the yibum marriage is achieved. Echon ha'ma'ara ve'echon ha'goymer kona. Whether it be ma'ara. Now ma'ara is a situation of male organ contact with the woman. To what degree, we can't commit ourselves right now because there are different opinions of what hara is. Whether it be, we'll call it partial connection, or gomer, that's a more complete form of, let's say, organ insertion. Kana. The bond is formed. V'lo chilek bein bia lebia. There's a Rashi adds bein bia lebia, bein bia kedarka l'shelo kedarka, ubein hara l'gmar bia. There is bia kedarka, which is where the couple, the man and woman, cohabit in the normal fashion through, we'll say, the orifice of reproduction, and the shelo kedarka is where the man has cohabits with her, but not through the normal way, but through the, we'll say, the other orifice. V'chein habo al achas mikol ha'arayis shebetorah opsulos. The standards that we've just laid down for the consummation of a yibum marriage, the same standards, we will say, apply to prohibited relations. That when let's say, brother and sister, for example, would, let's say, cohabit in this partial fashion or this unusual fashion, that would be considered a full-fledged violation of the Torah law, and they would be chayav kores. And if it's a case of father and daughter, or mother and son, that would lead to court execution. Psulos, those are women that are unfit to the kahuna. Kagon, almona l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza kohen hedyo. Those are two examples that are kohen related. A widow cannot cohabit with a kohen gadol, and likewise a grusha, a divorcee, or a chalutza with a standard kohen. Mamzeres u'nesina l'Yisrael, by a mamzeres, an illegitimate a woman, or a descendant from the nesinim, a people that let's say falsely joined the Jewish ranks, and a Jewish man, or the other way around, a female regular kosher Jewess with a male mamzer or nasin. Pasla, that will render her unfit. Velo chilek bein bia lebia, and no distinction is made between the different types of bia that we described. Now this idea is explained a little further in Rashi. Mamzeres u'nesina lav absolu kunakoi. The case of mamzeres u'nesina featured in Mishnah are not illustrations of women that are puzzled to the kahuna. Daha psula v'kaima. They're already puzzled. It's not a function of their having had a forbidden relationship and thereby becoming puzzled. They're already puzzled. And there's no ramifications here with regard to truma from their father's household that they would become unfit for. V'od bias kosher my megarola elinin hara nokta. This was the issue of mamzer with a bas Yisrael or a mamzeris with Yisrael is featured in Mishnah because of the issue of this partial contact. Well, the milki ole ha Yisrael behara kigmar bia. The point of the Mishnah in featuring these cases was to show that even for partial insertion or partial contact, lashes will be given because of the violation of the negative command involved, as if it were a full-fledged act of intimacy. The Gemara opens with a question regarding a term seen in the Mishnah. On the second line of the Mishnah, it said, Afilu, even if, Afilu hu shogeg v'hi mezida. My Afilu. What is the Mishnah accomplishing by saying even where he is unwitting and she has harlotrous intentions? Gemara explains, Lo mibaya kamar. The structure of the Mishnah is in the lo mibaya sense. Lo mibaya means I don't have to tell you this, but even something else. Lo mibaya, the answer lasts a number of lines. As you can see, we've marked it accordingly. Lo mibaya hu shogeg v'hi ka mechavno lemitzvah. I don't have to tell you about that the bond would take hold, where he was unwitting, but she had yibum mitzvah intention. That if that was their, we'll say, level of cohabitation, that the bond takes place, that there's a fulfillment of the yibum requirement. Hinami, who mezid v'hi ka mechavno mitzvah, or he has harlotrous intentions, but she has mitzvah intentions. Elo afilu hu shogeg v'hi mazida. And here's where the afilu comes into play. Even where on both sides there is no mitzvah intention, where he thinks it's some other woman and she has harlotrous intentions. Another case of hu mezid v'hi shogeges, the travayu lo kamechavni l'shemis, where neither one, the man nor the woman, have mitzvah intentions. Afilu hachikana. Even so, the yibum bond has been fulfilled. It takes hold and they become husband and wife. We should emphasize the difference between a yibum bond and a simple case of man-woman that meet one another out in the street that are not related to one another. When you're dealing with the yibum bond, there's already, in halachic terms or in halachic thinking, there's already a partial connection, a partial bonding that has already taken place. By the mere fact that one has a brother, the brother's wife, in the event that there are no children, the Torah already imposes a bond, so that to concretize it, to complete it, even this low-level type relation, physical intimacy, would clinch it. This is in contrast to two strangers, man meets woman, where there's no previous connection that exists. This kind of low-level, unintentional act of intimacy would not create a marital status. We continue in the Gemara. Toni Rabbi Chia. Afilu shneim shegigim, shneim mezidim, shneim anusim. Even if both are in this we'll call low-level mindset position, they bond. On the side of the Gemara, we have a nosei mivneh heading, a topic heading with a structural note. You'll notice triangles appear. These are arba shlavim levarer mahu oines. Aboa yivimta b'oines. What does that mean? Oines. Oines is generally thought to be something that is beyond your control. So what does it mean to have intimacy in an ones fashion? The Gemara. Oines de masnisin hechidami. Ones cited in the Mishnah. What is meant by it? that idol worshippers overpowered some man, a brother who survived his deceased brother who left no kids, and they overpowered him and pushed him upon her, on the widow. That is not a case of onus, though. It's true they overpowered him. However, for the actual male insertion, the Omar Rava ain't onus le'erva. The concept of onus doesn't apply when you're dealing with forbidden relations. Lefi she'ein kishui elu ladas, because the man, in order to effectively have insertion, he has to experience kishui. Kishui means hardening or erection, and that does not happen unless there is intent. Intent is not onus, so that even if he's physically being restrained or overpowered by the idol worshippers, there is the actual act for it to take place needs the man's awareness and intent to be present. So that's not onus. That's not something we call beyond your control. Ella b'yoshen. Rashi says, it happens that people experience kishui aver when they are asleep. So maybe that's what happened, that he was asleep and achieved the kishui that's necessary for the physical insertion, and it happened with him and her while he was asleep. Well, that's not a good pshat either. HaRav Yehuda, we continue at the top of Daf Nun Dalet Amud Aleph. Yoshen loy kana b'yevimto. In the state of sleep, that actually does not create a yibum bond, or it doesn't complete the marriage. Rashi at the top says Yoshen lo kana, the Yoshen lav bar das, v'lo have kinyono kinyon. He's not capable of awareness when he's sleeping, and therefore his action, his acquisition or his action is not considered effective. Ella, third approach, beniska. Rashi says on the top, beniska shniska shelishto. He intended to be with his wife in intimacy, and he achieved kishui with wife intention, with his own wife. We're talking about Shimon, who's the surviving brother, has his own wife, so he intended to be with her. V'nofal min hagag v'niska b'yevimto. Sounds almost unrealistic, but the Gemara deals with all topics, even those which appear to be unrealistic. They have halachic ramifications when you wouldn't even think of applying it. So we have to take this seriously, where he achieved kishui with the intention of being with his wife, fell off a roof and landed in an intimate position with the Yevamos. So is that what oinus means? V'ho omar rabo nofal min hagag v'niska chayav b'arba dvorim u'v'yevimtoi lo yikona. If a man falls off a roof and ends up in an intimate position with some woman, so he would be guilty of compensating her for the four different types of, we'll call it, damage payments, and they are by name, and they're featured in Maseches Bava Kama: nezek, tsar, ripui, and sheves. Physical damage, pain, any medical expenses, and the unemployment. Those are just the literal translations of the four different forms of compensation that need to be made. Maseches Bava Kama deals with them at much greater length. So if one is nofal min hagag v'niska, so by way of tort law, he must offer compensation. However, we dashed underline the main point, uveyavimtoi loy kana, but that would not acquire in the case of a yibum marriage. So that if it happened to be his Yevamos walking on street level and his falling upon her in a state of kishui and creating a physical act of cohabitation, it wouldn't though acquire. And we're taught in our Mishnah that a bond of onus under onus circumstances does acquire. So what do we mean by onus? It's not this case. Ella kagoin sheniskavein liishtoi v'takfasa yevimtoi uba oleha. It's a case where a man, in this case the Yavam, had his own wife, and he intended to be to cohabit with his own wife, and his sister-in-law, the widow of his deceased brother who left no children, she was some type of, we'll say, tough individual, and she overpowered him and brought him, while he was already in a state of kishuim, brought him upon her, so he was oines. We continue in the Gemara. This is now a quote from the source we saw taught by Rabbi Chia. Shnehem anusim debei Rabbi Chia heichidami. How can you illustrate a case of both of them being oines that Rabbi Chia had taught in his source? There's a little star at the side indicating Nun Gimel Amud Beis. You can find where that quote comes from. Kegoin sheniskavein lishto. Imagine a man, the Yavam, who had intention to be with his wife, and he achieved kishui in anticipation of being with his wife. And at that point, idol worshippers grabbed hold of him. And they overpowered him, and they had control of the widow, Ruvain's widow, the widow of his deceased brother, and they pushed them, inserted him into her again against their will, overpowering them. Hence, they can both be described as oines.